Hey everyone, I am so excited to share with you two upcoming opportunities to grow yourself personally and professionally. I've got two new virtual workshops that will be coming up in January 2021. You can choose either one of them. One of them really has a focus for personal and professional growth for women, and the other one is going to be a focus on time management, which is, I know it's one of the things that I hear so many people say is they need help with learning how to manage time better. And so both opportunities are going to be virtual via Zoom. That's a wonderful thing about technology, is we can reach people all over the place, all over the United States, all over the world, through virtual sessions that will help us grow. I'm going to be covering the material from a couple of my different books in each of these workshops, and you're going to get the copy of the book themselves when you register for the workshop. So two great opportunities coming up. I know you're interested in developing yourself in personal growth, and these are going to be some great opportunities to do that. So looking forward to seeing you all on the workshops. You can get details on both of them, find registration information, all that good stuff. Go to riastory.com/workshop. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode on increasing influence daily. Last week's episode, we talked about increasing your leadership daily, which really comes down to developing character, right? Because that's what determines our leadership with other people in large part, or the bulk of our influence with other people. But today's episode, we really want to talk about the competency side, developing our competencies that help us influence other people. Now, competency is absolutely important. Character determines more of our influence, and certainly the majority of our influence, but competency is a very important 10 to 13% of our influence. And we do need that. We don't need to develop it as much as we need to develop our character, but we absolutely need it. Remember, competency is our technical abilities, our writing, our math, our skills, anything like that. That's our competency. And that's the things that we know how to do. What determines most of our influence is how we do them, right? Who we are as a person. Now, I think I've pointed this out before, but you absolutely cannot neglect developing that competency. But the question becomes, what competencies should you develop? I've often heard, work on your weaknesses because then you can be well-rounded. But think of it like this. I use the example of our children sometimes because it's easier to relate. If your child is just absolutely terrible in math, many times what we feel the urge to do is say, well, work really hard on your math skills and bring that math grade up. But here's the thing. If you're just not naturally gifted in math, it doesn't matter if you bring that up to average or a passing, above passing grade, because you're not ever going to be great and excellent in math, right? If you're not naturally gifted there relative to competencies, then spending tremendous amounts of time developing that is never going to get you to exceptional in that skill. So when it comes to competencies, it really is important to develop our strengths, our gifts, our natural talents and abilities. Now, when it comes to character, yes, we want to work on our weaknesses because weaknesses of character are what hold us back. Being on time, for example. If you are not able to consistently be on time in any dimension of your life, that's going to hold you back. It's going to decrease your influence at some level. If you're always chronically late, that will decrease your influence. There's no doubt about it. So that would be a weakness of character example where you do want to develop that weakness. But relative to competency, we want to work on our strengths. And I think that's part of the whole concept of Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, is first just knowing who we are and what we are, and then developing that into our potential, developing our gifts and our talents and our uniqueness and celebrating that and building on that. Because, it's not just enough to figure out what you're good at. You've got to discover what you're good at or great at, and where that overlaps with what people will pay you to do if you want to make a living from doing something you're passionate about, right? What are you excited about getting up to do every single day? It's not enough just to be talented at something if you're not excited about it as well. So you want to really find where the overlap of those two areas is, and then where those two areas overlap with what you can get paid to do. Now, here's the thing. I do want to just point this out. If your God calling is stay-at-home mom or a volunteer or something like that, this still applies to you. Now, your passion will overlap with what you get paid for, right? Because those roles aren't necessarily paid, but it's absolutely still important to discover where your gifts are, because that's how you make the world a better place. So even if your role is more of a volunteer or a stay-at-home mom, right, it's not necessarily monetarily getting paid that rewards you. That is your reward. Serving others in that role and being the best you can in that role is your reward. So, but each of us were created for that specific purpose. It's just our greatest joy in life is discovering it. But sometimes that's challenging. I know that's much easier said than done, but we absolutely will be filled with incredible joy when we discover that and we work to develop it. So, a little bit different in this episode, I wanted to give you some questions that come from the workbook, the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, Become the Woman You Are Destined to Be workbook. And, the book itself is a standalone resource. I've shared that with you. The workbook is for those people who want to go maybe on a deeper dive or maybe want to accelerate their journey. If they're interested in investing more time and thought into intentionally accelerating their growth. So the workbook is an additional resource. But today's episode, I wanted to give you some questions from the workbook because I really think they're particularly valuable for this chapter and this element. I always like to say, become the best at what you're meant to do because that's where you will make the greatest impact in the world. So, a couple of questions I'd like you to think about or think into. Now, if you've got a pen and a pencil handy, grab that and you can jot these down. If you're driving, of course, I know a lot of you listen to podcasts in the car. I love to listen to podcasts in the car. It's a great way to really maximize your time and learning. I also like to listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm walking. I find that on my daily walks, number one, it's a great time to think. It's great thinking time, but it's also a great time to listen to podcasts. I don't like to listen to podcasts while I'm running or working out with intensity because I really cannot focus on listening to something and absorbing the material at that point. But when I'm walking, it really is a much more relaxed pace physically. And so mentally, it's great time to think. It's great time to listen to something that's going to help me grow. Um, However, if you're driving or if you're walking or exercising, for example, maybe you don't have a pen and paper. And so as I go through these questions, maybe you'll want to pause the podcast and think into the answers. And that's okay. Just figure out what works best for you. So, a couple of questions relative to this chapter to think about when it comes to developing your competencies and increasing your influence daily. So, number one, ask yourself, what are my gifts? What do I naturally do very well? Where and when do I excel? Now, this page is likely going to be very long, right? Start thinking about, if you're writing this down, start thinking about the things that you're good at. For example, on my list would be time management, organization, managing projects, managing everything from what's in my pantry and meal planning. Planning and strategizing and managing things, that's a strength for me. And so that would go on my list in a lot of different ways. It also, one of the things that I'm just naturally good at is like packing and preparing for a trip. Like I almost can't help it. The minute I have a trip coming up, I start thinking about, well, what do I need to take? What's going to happen at every moment of the trip? Oh, I better pack a raincoat or, sunblock or an extra hat. Whatever it is, I just almost can't help but start planning and preparing for what's coming up. It's a gift. Now that's not there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a gift, and I just would write that down as something that I naturally do very well. But that doesn't necessarily answer the second question. The second question is, what brings me joy when I do it? What am I passionate about? What am I passionate about? You see, this could be a very different list than the first one. So start another page. If you're working in a notebook, or if you're like me, I love just getting a legal pad and filling up notes on something like that, because I can brainstorm and free write and then make it pretty later. So this might be a completely different list. Now, you may very well have something that overlaps with the first list or the first page, but you might not, right? What you're good at and what brings you joy are not necessarily all going to be the same thing. Some of them will be, absolutely, but not all of them. And the third question to ask yourself, what will people pay me to do that I'm passionate about doing? Right? So here's where you start to see the overlap between page number 1, page number 2, and where those both overlap with something that you can get paid to do. For example, if you are gifted at doing hair and makeup and you enjoy it, you find you want to read about it and study about it and practice on yourself for others, is that something you can get paid to do? Absolutely. Now, maybe it's going to require a degree in cosmetology, perhaps, or licensure or something like that. But there are people who get paid for doing that. I guarantee you, there are people who get paid for things that you are good at, that you have joy when you do that when you're passionate about. Now, number 4, once you know where those things overlap, is think deeply into what competencies would help me increase my influence. So this is where you think about a certification in that skill, or a degree, or maybe it's not getting a degree. Maybe it's just becoming a subject matter expert. And there are a lot of ways to do that. I talked to a lady, it's been a couple of months ago, and she really had just someone, a mutual acquaintance connected us and suggested to her that maybe I could help her think into her situation and kind of coach her through a difficult spot. So I got on the phone with her, and she was sharing with me some of her journey, and she's had some adversity and faced some trials in her life, but she's in a position where she really wants to step into a formal role of helping people, maybe as a counselor or psychologist or something like that. The problem that she's facing is, obviously, those type of field, or that field particularly, requires a college education, right? You have to get that foundational college degree before you can step into that role as a paid professional. So she's in that position where she's discovered the direction she wants, not in a position yet where she can, or has achieved that degree. And so her question to me was really, she was really thinking into, well, what should I be doing now? And I encouraged her. I said, you know what, even though you're not able to actively be working on that degree, there is so much that you can be reading and developing yourself on that's going to help you be successful in that field and in that role once you get the degree, right? Don't focus on what you cannot achieve right now. Focus on the other things that you can be doing and preparing that's going to help you be successful when you get there. If you're not at a financial place where you can start college right away, then there are thousands, I guarantee you, thousands of books and resources that will help her be successful in that field. She could already be studying in her lane and her area of interest and what she wants to get paid to do, and that's going to help her be more successful in that role. And it's possible. think about this. It's possible that as she prepares and as she reads and as she develops herself in that field, that could help her increase her influence enough to maybe get a scholarship in that role, right? Or as she learns and grows, she might talk to people who are already in that field and maybe they could recommend her for an internship or something like that, right? So sometimes we don't think about that. We start to focus on, well, man, I can't do this right now, and that's my next step. Not necessarily, right? If that's not a step you can take, if there's a roadblock down that road, you've got to find a detour. But sometimes finding that detour and being willing to take the detour, even if it's the off-road, bumpy, unpaved road instead of the super highway you want to drive down, sometimes that unpaved, bumpy road detour is going to help you accelerate your journey. Sometimes it's shorter. Now, it might be more difficult to travel. You might have to put it in four-wheel drive and up-level your determination, but you sometimes find out that it's really the path you were supposed to travel all along. So, next question to think about. This is a powerful one. Who can mentor me in this area? Now, mentorship could be a lot of different things. It could be finding someone who has successfully done what you want to do and they can mentor you in person, but it might be that you will look around and say, I don't know anyone personally who's done what I want to do. So maybe it's reading a book by an expert. There are so many ways. Maybe you're not a book person, but find a podcast. Maybe that's another great way to learn from someone who's an expert in that field. I love just the number of ways that we can learn and develop ourselves in this age. I think back to just, how much technology has increased the availability of information. Just even, 30 years ago, we didn't have ways to develop ourselves nearly as much. I mean, back then you had to go get a book and you probably had to go to the library and you had to look up in the card catalog system. Some of you are probably not even old enough to remember what that was, but I can remember going to the library and having to look up in the card system a book or a topic, a books or several books on a topic, and then you'd have to write down the decimal numbers, and then you'd have to go find them in the library. Or you could maybe go to a bookstore, but that was expensive. And these days you just Google something and that information is readily available. In fact, so much information it can be overwhelming. And then last question I'd like you to think into, what do I feel called to do? Because odds are you have some things on your list that you are good at that also bring you joy, that also you could get paid for doing. But what do you feel most called to do? Mac and I had a conversation the other day. We're talking about competencies, and there are a lot of things that both of us could do and could do well, but that we don't necessarily feel called to do. And that's really important. That comes down to our purpose-driven life, living into our purpose. Because we cannot do everything. And if we try to accomplish everything in life, we won't be successful, number one, at just about anything. We can only be excellent when we start to narrow our focus and dig in. You want to be a mile deep in that lane, in your lane, whatever your lane is, because that's where your purpose overlaps with your gifts and what brings you joy, your passion, what you can wrap your life around, right? That's what the question really becomes. Because when you discover that, it takes some work to think into that. It takes some self-reflection and some self-awareness, some self-development. But when you find that and you develop that, that's where you're going to see your influence increase exponentially relative to that field. You want to be the expert. You want to be the miles deep expert in what you're called to do and where you're called to do it. And that's where you start to make an incredible impact, right? In your world, the world around you, the people around you, whether that's your clients and your customers or your children, Only you can answer these questions for yourself to the best of your knowledge. And sure, it may change as the seasons of life change a little bit, but your primary purpose isn't really going to change. It may be reflected differently in your life, but and it may manifest itself differently as your calling, but it's just a matter of refining yourself until you figure out what the next part of your journey is and what that looks like and how your passion and purpose are overlapping in this season of life. Until next time.